Part 28. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 271. Rongyu was speechless. No matter what Empress Jinghua is like, or what Rong Huijin was like in the past, they are them, and we are us. Nan 11 raised her hand and caressed his face. It is you I like and love in this life. You are the one holding hands and growing old together. Anyone who tries to break up or destroy the relationship between us as husband and wife is our enemy. No matter what the truth is. No matter what relationship Empress Jinghua and Rong Huijin have with them, the past is over. There is no need to get to the bottom of it, and there is no need to immerse yourself in the panic and injustice of the past and torture yourself. Maybe they all carry their own unique memories. Whether it was because they forgot to drink mangpo soup when crossing the Nahi Bridge, or because of some other special reasons, Nan 11 had no idea of going into details. She is willing to let everything go with the wind, and the beautiful memories can be recalled, while the memories that make both of them sad and lonely can be completely buried. If someone insists on uncovering the pain of the past, she will not sit idly by. 11 Rongyu's voice seemed to be in a trance. If Empress Jinghua knew what Rong Huijin had planned against her, she might not forgive him. Nan 11 is surprised and won't forgive. So this is the biggest problem and uneasiness in his heart? Then don't let her know, it's such a simple thing. Nan 11 smiled faintly. What's the matter if you don't forgive me? Anyway, Empress Jinghua is no longer alive, so she can't jump out of the mausoleum and kill him again. Rongyu seemed to want to say something more, but Nan 11 pondered for a moment and said, Rongyu, there is something I haven't told you. Rongyu said warmly, what's the matter? Do you still remember when you trapped me in the regent's palace, and my temper suddenly changed? Nan 11 hesitated again, and finally decided to tell him the secret. I used to be completely devoted to Gu Qingshu, but I hated you for forcing me to be trapped in the regent's palace. The actions of the palace, but then one day, my attitude changed, as if I suddenly had an enlightenment. It was the time when Nan you came to the palace to find me. Do you still remember? Rongyu's expression changed slightly, a dark color flashed across his eyes, and the nerves that had just relaxed became tense again. I think I have an indissoluble bond with dreams. Nan 11 smiled lightly. It was also because of a big dream that made me see clearly who is sincere and who is fake. 11 Rongyu spoke in a low voice, interrupting her unfinished words. Everything that appears in the dream is fake, don't take it too seriously. Nan 11 was silent for a moment. What if that was not just a dream? Rongyu said, if those dreams can serve as a warning, you can regard them as God's arrangement. If not, you don't need to take them too seriously. There is no need to take them too seriously if the dreams are true or false. Nan 11 felt a strange feeling in her heart, glanced at him thoughtfully, and then nodded slowly, yes. In fact, she wanted to be honest with him. In the past, she felt that the idea of rebirth was too bizarre and ridiculous, and she was worried that if she spoke out, she would be regarded as a monster. However, some of the bizarre dreams in the past 2 days and Rongyu's hidden thoughts made her understand that some things are true or fake. Regardless, it actually just depends on people's cognitive ability. If you are willing to believe that it is a story about the past and present life, maybe you can add a bit of beautiful fantasy. If you don't want to believe it, that's okay, just listen to a story. But since he didn't want to hear it, Nan 11 stopped talking for the time being. When there is a suitable opportunity in the future, maybe they can truly understand all the truth openly and honestly. The weather is nice today, do you want to enjoy the flowers? Rongyu turned to look at the garden. Let's go for a walk in the garden. Nan 11 nodded. The two walked out of Nuanting together and walked slowly along the winding flower path. Nan 11's voice was soft. Rongyu, do you think Dongling's fate of having a queen every 200 years can be changed? Is it really necessary to follow it? Do it according to destiny, otherwise disaster will happen. You can choose to believe it as long as it does not go against your own will. Wrong, you said, if you can accept yourself as the queen, and this throne does not bring you troubles and burdens, we will follow fate. Nan 11 understood what he meant, turned around and said with a smile, then if I really don't want to be the queen, or if this throne will bring me endless troubles, we will go against the will and ignore the so-called destiny. Wrong, you nodded, well, that's right. Nan 11 smiled with her eyebrows crooked, wrong you, we are about to arrive at dongling territory, do you want to be so arrogant? The corners of Wrong Yu's lips raised, and a sincere smile finally appeared on his face, don't you just like your husband to be arrogant? Nan 11 snorted, Tsundere. Wrong Yu restrained himself for a long time, and finally couldn't help but reached out and hugged her, lowered his head and kissed her eyes, 11er, you are my strongest support. With you by my side, I can be arrogant and unscrupulous. All my confidence comes from you, if one day in the future, you decide that you no longer like me. His voice became lower and lower, and Wrong Yu looked at her deeply, with strong emotion in his eyes, you must tell me in person, okay? Nan 11 was slightly startled, and her heart felt sour, astringent, and painful for a moment. She couldn't help but reached out and caressed his eyebrows, what happens after I tell you? Are you going to leave this world alone again, leaving me alone? Wrong Yu remained silent. Wrong Yu, my love lasts forever. I will never give up halfway or change my heart midway, so I will never feel like I don't like you. Nan 11 blinked and smiled softly, so, in the future, as long as you don't follow me, if you hear anything you don't like from my mouth, you can't just wishful thinking that I don't like you, let alone do stupid things, you know. Wrong Yu nodded lightly. Nan 11 put her arms around his neck and said, I will be nicer to you in the future. I will be better every day, so that you can live happily and contentedly every day and not worry about random thoughts. Then I will be stricter with you and won't allow you to do anything if you have wild thoughts and unfounded worries, I will punish you if you disobey me. Wrong Yu quietly stared at the smile on her li. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 272. Nan 11's eyebrows were dyed with a smile, but her voice was coquettish, I just can't bear it. How could she be willing to humiliate such a proud and noble man? Not even in the name of love. She doesn't want to see his pride broken, doesn't want him to lower his stature, doesn't want him to compromise for anything. Even in the past, their identities and roles may have really had a difference in dignity. The fate of a person's life is changeable. A person from a poor family may become a noble son, and a powerful person may fall into the abyss in an instant. What's more, there is no need to keep an eye on things that have already passed 200 years ago. Nan 11 feels that she has looked down on many things now, and her mentality has changed drastically compared to before. The only person beside her is an obsession that she can never let down again, he regards her as an obsession, and she why not? This silly man, with his paranoid and heart-wrenching way, walked into her heart little by little, and occupied a place in her heart domineeringly. He carefully protected this relationship with vulnerability and caution, allowing it to slowly take root and sprout. As if a seamless love network was carefully woven from beginning to end, tightly trapping her in the network, and she could no longer leave. Nan 11 was trapped willingly. She hopes to see a proud and noble regent, a strong husband who will always be by her side, who is as solid as a rock, unparalleled in strength, and is not afraid of any wind, rain, ice, or frost in the world. Except for her, no one can make him lower his proud head, and she will protect his pride at all costs and will not allow anyone to trample on it. Just like the weather these 2 days, it was rainy yesterday and sunny today. When the car started driving again the next morning, Wrong Yu and Nan 11's moods had cleared away the gloom. No one except themselves knew how their moods had changed in the past 2 days. Fukan and Chu Hongii were inseparable for 2 days, and they were still together when they were on the road on the 3rd day. The two horses rode side by side, leaving Chu Xuanyi without a chance to speak. Ever since Xianyuan 11 said in front of Chu Xuanyi, "I counted on my fingers last night, Xuanyi, you are in great danger." Chu Xuanyi always felt uneasy. He thought about it, except for that night. Apart from what he said to Rong Yu, he didn't do anything else that was harmful to the world. How could he be in such trouble? He tried to find some clues, but Rong Yu and Nan 11 were inseparable, and Fu Chen and Hong Yi couldn't tell each other apart for a moment, so he couldn't find any chance to talk. Time passed like this day by day, still driving during the day and resting at night. The late autumn season became cooler day by day. Only Nan 11, who was sitting in the carriage covered with soft fur, was protected from the wind and almost never felt the coldness of autumn and winter. Cold. The pregnant belly of more than 4 months is slowly swollen, but it is difficult to see it under the loose and thick clothes. Nan 11 still looks so slender, but although she has been on the road for the past few days, there are always people eating. After careful preparation and not being exposed to wind or sun for more than a month, Nan 11's already delicate and fair cheeks became 3 points whiter and a little more jade-like and lustrous. The more she looked at her, the more refined and noble and beautiful she became. The weather in the following days was mostly bright and sunny, with no rainy days. In mid-October, the vast number of cars drove into Tangling. In early November, fine white snowflakes began to float in the sky. The eldest princess drove to Dongling Imperial City. Outside, the tall and majestic city gate is right in front of you, symbolizing the supreme solemnity of Dongling Imperial City. Nan 11 stood up and opened the curtain, looking at the Imperial City in front of her, feeling a vague sense of familiarity that she had not seen for a long time. She frowned, calmly suppressing the strange feeling in her heart, and reached out to catch a few soft snowflakes. This year's snow seems to have come a bit early. Rong Yu said, "This is Rugzyu." Nan 11 turned her eyes slightly, raised her eyes to look at Rong Yu, who was sitting on the horse, pursed her lips and smiled, "Rugzyu." Rong Yu nodded and dismounted neatly. The sound of horse hooves could be heard in the city. Rong Yu turned a deaf ear and got into Nan 11's carriage. Xianyuan 11 was sitting on another carriage in front. At this time, only Yin Yu was taking care of Nan 11's carriage. When she saw her prince getting on the carriage, Yin Yu took the initiative to get out of the carriage without waiting for instructions, leaving her prince behind. A chance to spend some quiet time with the princess. "Rong Yu, do you mean that I am Rugzyu?" Nan 11 put down the car curtain and looked at Rong Yu sitting beside her with a smile. Her voice was soft and her smile was bright. Rong Yu nodded, "You are Dongling Xionggrui." Nan 11 raised her eyebrows and smiled, "I'm afraid the dignitaries in Dongling may not think so." "They must think so," Rong Yu said calmly. "Each major family has its own ranking. If anyone disobeys, another family will take over." His tone was too calm, and the cold and domineering voice revealed in his voice made Nan 11 feel like they had returned to the attitude they had when facing civil and military officials in the Great Zhou dynasty, with a natural dignity. Domineering. The panic and uneasiness of the past few days have gone away, and Rong Yu is still the invincible Rong Yu. Nan 11 smiled brightly. Looking at Rong Yu sitting opposite her, she couldn't help but wonder, "Why are you so far away from me? Could it be that when you arrived in Dongling, you really started to be cautious?" "My body is cold," Rong Yu explained. "It doesn't matter. You sit down first and cover yourself with the blanket." It was snowing outside, although it wasn't very heavy, but there were some snowflakes on his body, and there was a bit of the cold air of early winter, so he was afraid of freezing her. Nan 11 wiped him with a handkerchief. "Is it cold?" Rong Yu shook his head. "I am a martial artist, so this little bit of cold is nothing." Nan 11 was about to speak, but heard the sound of boots landing on the ground after turning over and dismounting outside, and then someone saluted respectfully. "This general greets the princess." "Welcome the princess and Princess Feng back to the palace." Commander Yang, No need to be polite. Xianyuan 11's faint voice came from the front. The 5,000 soldiers of the Great Zhou who are escorting Princess Feng are led by General Ling, and the 5,000 soldiers of the Dongling who are welcoming Princess Feng back are led by General Chu. Princess Feng and I will go directly to the city, and Commander Yang will take them to the military camp to settle down. The soldiers of Dongling must be considerate and humble to the soldiers of the Great Zhou, and must not neglect them in the slightest. Nan 11 raised her eyes and looked at Rong Yu, who gave him a calm look and said softly, "Let my mother-in-law arrange it." Nan 11 nodded. "I obey your orders," Commander Yang responded respectfully. "Please ask General Chu to escort the eldest princess and Princess Feng to the palace. The emperor is already eager to see Princess Feng." The high priest, several cabinet ministers, and princes of the royal family are also waiting in the Dajhan Palace, waiting to pay their respects to Her Royal Highness the Princess. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 273. Xianyuan 11 nodded, "I understand." Commander Yang resigned, got on his horse with his soldiers, and walked to Chu Hongii. The two made a temporary handover. Chu Hongii gave him a silver white tiger talisman for him to temporarily place troops and horses, and then led a group of soldiers to personally escort the eldest princess's car through the city gate and headed towards the palace. In the imperial city, the imperial guardsmen cleared the way, with one post at 10 steps and one sentry at 5 steps. The order was maintained in a solemn manner. When the people who were stopped on both sides of the road saw the royal carriage, they knelt down and saluted. Nan 11 opened the curtain and looked at the prosperous imperial city, with a faint smile on her lips. "It really feels like returning home in glory." Rong Yu said, "The people in Dongling are simpler than those in the Great Zhou dynasty. The people believe in gods and respect the priest's hall. They believe that people have reincarnation, so in comparison, good and evil are more distinct, and the rules of conduct are stronger. Will not cross that line of evil easily." Nan 11 raised her eyes to look at him, her eyes shining with admiration. "Rong Yu, you fake Dongling native knows more than me. You are also a fake Dongling person." Rong Yu raised the corners of his lips, with a bit of a smile on his face. "You are the regent princess of Dezhou. Before you came to Dongling, you had nothing to do with Dongling. There is no need. Understand their customs and customs. But you'll need to know later." Rong Yu was silent for a moment. "You can ask me anything you want to know in the future." "Okay." Nan 11 winked playfully. "Now that I have a husband, everything is ready for me. My husband is omnipotent, and I will also take advantage of him, so that I will not know anything about Dongling customs and be laughed at by their subjects." Rong Yu wanted to hug her, but he was worried about passing on the coldness on his body to her, so he had to restrain himself temporarily and hummed softly, "No one dares to laugh at you." Nan 11 liked his calm and domineering look more and more, which was clearly more intimidating than those so-called bluffs and domineering displays. She moved her body and took the initiative to move to Rong Yu's side, wrapping both of them in blankets. "It's very warm in the carriage, I'm not cold at all, and you don't have to treat me like a delicate doll all the time." Rong Yu was about to avoid her touch, but when he heard this, he stopped and wrapped the blanket around her alone, and then directly wrapped her and the blanket in his arms. "You are pregnant now, so don't act recklessly." Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. "Are you thinking about your children?" Rong Yu kissed her face, "For the sake of you and our children." Nan 11 raised her head towards him and closed her eyes. Her eyelashes were curled like two cicada wings. Rong Yu was silent at first, then put his arms around her waist, lowered his head and kissed her lips, savoring the peck. His love was so deep that he could hardly control the urge to rub her into his body. Outside the carriage, the snowflakes were as light as catkins and the cold wind was howling, but inside the carriage, The atmosphere was pleasant and the temperature was rising. Half an hour later, the carriage and horses stopped outside the palace gate. Nan 11 opened the curtain and took a look. Are we here? It's time to get off the carriage. Rong Yu hugged Nan 11, who was wrapped like a silkworm chrysalis, and said in a light and warm voice, "Don't worry." Chu Hong'ai rode her horse forward and showed her token to the guard at the gate of the palace. Princess Feng returns to the palace. You are welcome to greet her. As soon as the words fell, the guards on duty at the palace gate retreated to both sides and knelt down, making way for the carriage to pass. Chu Hong'ai raised her hand to signal and took the lead in riding her horse into the palace. The carriage and the accompanying guards followed behind. It was obvious that in this light snowing climate, even if the palace had regulations that no one was allowed to ride horses in the palace or enter the palace by carriage, Chu Hong'ai had made her own decision. This rule does not apply today. In today's climate, if the noble and delicate Princess Feng is allowed to get off the car and walk into the palace, let alone the eldest princess feeling distressed, I am afraid that the regent of Dazhu will have a fit on the spot. There is no way he will restrain himself just because he is on Dongling territory. Temper, this is what Fukin reminded Chu Hong'ai in advance. Although Chu Hong'ai has a strong temper, she always listens to Fukin's words, especially when Fukin talks about business in a serious tone. She always believes and obeys unconditionally. Guards were waiting on both sides of the royal road, and the order was strict and silent. The sound of clicking echoed in her ears. Nan 11 nestled in Rong Yu's arms with half-squinted eyes. Rong Yu, don't we need to wash and change clothes first before going to meet the saint? No need, Rong Yu said, that's fine. Nan 11 took off the blanket on her body. Today she was wearing a thick brocade white coat and a red cape with white edges. She looked like a snow lotus that had just emerged from the water. She was beautiful, smart and noble. Jade. Rong Yu kissed her forehead. It's beautiful. Nan 11 smiled and said, since we got married, my husband's previous habit of being indifferent and taciturn has never looked back. He has become better and better at sweet talk. If you like to hear it, I'll talk about it every day, Rong Yu said. I'll talk about it until you get bored. I won't be bothered, Nan 11 said with a smile. A woman likes her appearance. Which woman in the world doesn't love beauty? In addition to loving beauty, she also likes sweet words. She can't stand coaxing. Love words from the one she loves are like honey. Can make people feel sweet from the mouth to the heart. I can guarantee that even a cold-faced female general like Chu Hong'ai will never be able to withstand Fukin's sweet words, let alone me. Rong Yu sighed softly. If it could be so simple to make you happy, I wouldn't have to do anything for the rest of my life and just be responsible for making you happy. Nan 11 smiled happily, like a little girl without a heart. However, when the carriage really stopped, Nan 11 had restrained all her expressions of emotion. Through the curtains, I could see many ministers waiting at the stone steps in front of the palace. From their solemn robes, I could roughly tell which of them were royal relatives and which were important officials in the court. So many people came out in the cold wind and snow to welcome their crown prince and princess. In addition to showing great respect, it was also a silent deterrent for Nan 11. People with little courage, especially delicate women in the boudoir, would probably feel a little timid when they first saw such a scene. But Nan 11 just slowly put the blanket aside, lowered her head and adjusted her clothes and cloak. In a moment, her aura had changed. With Rong Yu's help, she bent down and walked out of the carriage. Outside the carriage, Yin Yu had already opened the umbrella and was about to reach out to help Nan 11 down. There was also a young eunuch kneeling on the ground outside the carriage. Nan 11 glanced at him and said calmly, "What are you doing?" "Princess Feng, you can step on his back to get off the carriage." "Let him stand up," Nan 11 said calmly, "I don't have this habit." As she said that, she turned her head and looked at Rong Yu, who came out of the carriage. "Husband, carry me out of the carriage." Rong Yu said nothing, holding her waist and gently floating to the ground. Husband. The expressions of the ministers of Dongling changed slightly. Just as they were about to speak, they saw Xianyuan 11 said calmly, "Don't stand here, go in and see the emperor." Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 274. The royal family members and important ministers looked at Nan 11. The 15 or 16-year-old girl was very bright and charming, and her facial features were somewhat similar to those of the eldest princess. It was not easy to mistake her. At this time, she was wearing a red fur cape with white piping, which made her whole body more dewy and delicate. She was not inferior to the ladies of the Dongling imperial capital family, but more eye-catching and elegant. As for the man beside her, husband. Everyone was suddenly dissatisfied. Although they had heard from the eldest princess that Princess Feng had gotten married in Dezhou, but now that they have arrived in Dongling, can the previous marriage still count? Princess Feng is the Princess Feng of Dongling, not the regent princess of Zhou dynasty, but the dignified crown prince of Dongling. How can she be called husband like an ordinary boudoir woman? Too unseemly. A group of people walked into the emperor's palace. The golden carved dragon pillars stand majestically, and the layers of bright yellow dragon curtains show the awe-inspiring and noble identity of the king of the country, and also block the unpredictable dragon face of the king on the dragon couch in the inner hall. Your Majesty, High Priest the Chamberlain walked into the inner hall and reported respectfully, "Princess Feng is here." Coming, an old man's weak voice came from the inner hall, a little hoarse, "Let her come in." Yes. The Chamberlain turned around and walked over, saluting Xianyuan 11 and Nan 11, "The Emperor has summoned His Royal Highness the Princess." Nan 11 nodded and walked towards the inner hall. Rongyu followed her silently. After taking 2 steps, a man in front of him stretched out his hand to stop him. "My father only summoned Princess Feng, leaving irrelevant people behind." Rongyu's expression was indifferent, with a thin layer of frost covering his noble and handsome face, revealing an alienation and indifference that would repel others thousands of miles away. Nan 11 stopped and looked at the middle-aged man who was speaking. He should be a few years older than her mother. She secretly guessed his identity and then said with a faint smile, "Mom, this is the eldest uncle." Xianyuan 11 smiled lightly and said, "Yes, this is the eldest son of Emperor Dongling, my mother's brother, your eldest uncle, and he is titled King Wei." Nan 11 said "Oh," and said in a calm tone, "Originally, as a junior, I should pay tribute to the emperor's uncle, but I heard that I came back to Dongling this time to succeed to the throne, so according to royal etiquette, the monarch and his ministers should come first. Uncle Huang is here to greet me." King Wei's expression changed slightly, and the other clan ministers present also looked at her in surprise. Apparently they did not expect that this little girl, who was only 15 or 16 years old, would give them a blow as soon as she came back. Princess Feng is absolutely right. Kings and ministers are always ranked before father and son. The royal family does not care about seniority, but King Wei has no intention of letting Princess Feng see the ceremony. What he means is... "I know what Uncle Huang means," Nan 11 interrupted the speaker lightly, "it's just that you may not understand what I mean." King Wei frowned. "Princess Feng might as well speak up to see if we are really too stupid. What I mean is that I returned to Dongling this time to inherit the throne and become the Queen of Dongling. If not, I would not have come back." Nan 11 smiled faintly, "I grew up in Dazhu for 16 years. I always thought that I was from the great Zhou dynasty, and later I married the regent and became the regent's concubine. These were all things that happened before I returned to Dongling, and no one can change this fact." The king of Wei and all the ministers were silent. Rongyu is not an outsider, and he is not an irrelevant person to me. Nan 11 looked calmly. As my husband, I have just arrived in a completely unfamiliar place. My husband must protect my personal safety at all times, fearing that I feel wronged and worried that I will be bullied. Princess Feng is the crown prince of Dongling. Who dares to bully you? This is just my uncle's own idea. My husband loves me deeply, so naturally he doesn't want to take any risks. King Wei was speechless, but he is not a Dongling subject. If I become the Empress of Dongling, my husband will be the Queen's husband. The Emperor's husband should be considered a legitimate member of the Dongling royal family, right? Nan 11 smiled lightly, or, Uncle actually doesn't want to see me come back to inherit the throne. Emperor. If so, I can go back to Dezhou immediately. King Wei's face darkened, and he turned to look at Rongyu. I have also heard of the reputation of the regent of the great Zhou dynasty. He has the power of 400,000 troops and horses. He is the uncrowned emperor in the great Zhou dynasty. It is true that the imperial court, everyone inside and outside, is in awe of the regent. Is it possible that the regent will rely on Princess Feng to protect you when you arrive at Dongling? Rongyu's voice was indifferent. What's your business? There were no unnecessary words, just one sentence, 4 words, but it made King Wei's face turn green and white, and he almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. The bright yellow dragon curtain fluttered, and a young man in snow-white floor-length robes walked out with a golden scepter in hand. His eyes were gentle and handsome, and his expression was calm. His eyes fell on Nan 11's face, and his eyes were as calm as water, showing no emotion. Your Majesty is waiting to see Princess Feng. He seemed to have not heard the dispute outside, and his voice was as calm as water. Please invite Princess Feng. And turning his eyes slightly, his eyes fell on the face of Rongyu, who was standing next to Nan 11. He only stayed for a moment, then quickly looked away. Come over with the regent of the great Zhou dynasty. King Wei had a worried expression, but he had to suppress his emotions. When the other clan members and nobles heard the high priest's words, they naturally couldn't deliberately embarrass him. Nan 11 nodded and walked into the inner hall. Rongyu followed her silently. When he passed the high priest, he paused slightly, and then followed Nan 11 towards the dragon couch with an expressionless face. The emperor leaned against the bedside, with 2 maids serving beside him. He was wearing a loose robe and looked lazy and a little weak, but his eyes still revealed the majesty of the emperor. Princess Feng, the eunuch reminded, you must salute the emperor when you enter the palace. She has never saluted anyone. Rongyu said indifferently. She won't salute here either. The eunuch's face changed, and he subconsciously turned his head to look at the emperor. Obviously, he had never encountered such a situation and was a little at a loss. The emperor's bedroom was so big that even with the dragon curtain between them, the sound of talking could not be blocked. When the king of Wei and other royal relatives standing outside heard this, their faces changed at the same time. Kneeling before the emperor is a protocol for the monarch and his subjects in any country, whether it's the Great Zhou or Dongling. Is the regent deliberately trying to provoke the emperor's authority, or does he simply not take the emperor of Dongling seriously? The king of Wei spoke in a cold tone, with obvious anger between his eyebrows. It's true that Princess Feng is the crown prince of Dongling decided by my father and the high priest, and she will inherit the country in the future, but this does not mean that you can rely on your status as the regent of the Great Zhou to dictate the rules of Dongling. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 275. Rongyu's eyes were dignified and cold, revealing a distant and indifferent look that kept people at a distance. Obviously, he was unwilling to pay attention to his shouting. Why is the great uncle so angry? Nan 11 smiled faintly. Rules are set by people. The Dongling royal family took me in as the empress. Doesn't it mean that I have the final say in the future? Rongyu is my husband and the future empress of Dongling. The great uncle's behavior is also considered as a rebellion. As soon as these words came out, The king of Wei's face changed suddenly. You. Enough, the emperor frowned. What are you arguing about? The king of Wei shut up with a gloomy expression. The emperor sat up with the help of the palace servants. He looked at Nan 11 and Rong Yu for a while, and said in a light tone with an imperial majesty, "It is true that I asked someone to bring you back to inherit the throne, but if you want to sit on the throne firmly, you can't just rely on yourself, but also rely on the loyal assistance of the royal family and the senior ministers. It's not appropriate to offend the royal elders as soon as you come back." Although these words were said gently, they came from the mouth of the king of a country, and no one dared to ignore the royal power. The ministers bowed and shouted, "Your Majesty is wise." The king of Wei's expression eased a little, and he looked at Nan 11 expressionlessly. "Grandfather is right. Whether you are a royal family or a commoner, respecting elders is a virtue that cannot be ignored. Everyone should set an example, and the king is no exception." Nan 11 smiled lightly, his tone neither humble nor arrogant, but if the king of a country can only rely on pleasing the elders and ministers to consolidate his position, what is the difference between him and a puppet? The emperor frowned. The faces of the royal family and the ministers present all changed, and they looked up in disbelief. "Princess Feng, please be careful with your words. This sentence is too serious. Even if Princess Feng doesn't know the rules, she shouldn't be so rebellious in front of the emperor. She is simply disrespectful to the emperor. Disrespectful to the elders. Princess Feng, why don't you quickly apologize to the emperor? Although I am a woman, I don't want to act according to other people's faces. If the elders' words and deeds are in line with their respected status, as a junior, I should respect them." Nan 11 turned her head, with a faint smile on her lips, and looked at the group of dongling elders in front of her nonchalantly. "If the elders' words and deeds are inconsistent with their status, and they only know how to take advantage of their seniority, then my status is just the crown prince of dongling. You should know better than me how to distinguish between the monarch and the ministers." After the voice fell, the surroundings fell into silence instantly. The faces of the royal family and the senior ministers turned pale and blue, looking at her in disbelief. They obviously did not expect that this little girl who was only 15 or 16 years old would dare to speak so shamelessly in front of them and not even give the emperor face. It turned out that she had been in the Great Zhou for a long time and was influenced by the regent of the Great Zhou, so she became arrogant and rebellious. "If grandfather thinks I am suitable to be the empress, I will do it. If he thinks I am not suitable, you can choose someone else." Nan 11 turned to look at the emperor. Her tone was always slow and calm, "But please grandfather and all the clan elders understand that I did not ask for the throne. If someone takes advantage of their seniority to boss me around, or even tries to criticize my words and deeds, or is rude to my husband, then I will definitely not be happy." The emperor looked at her silently. Although his body was getting worse these days, there was an indelible fatigue between his eyebrows. His eyes were not angry but majestic, and he faintly revealed admiration. "It is indeed the empress destined by the high priest. This courage and boldness is unmatched in the entire dongling royal family. This is not bluffing, nor is it a demonstration of provocation, but a kind of natural demeanor that makes people convinced." Although she was standing next to the powerful regent of the Great Zhou, the courage she gained from others could only be superficial and could not cover up her inner cowardice and weakness. However, Nan 11's courage and bearing came from her bones and belonged to her own confidence. The emperor stood up and walked out of the palace. The personal eunuch hurriedly extended his hand for him to support him and served carefully on the side. "Fourth brother, Yu Iking." Prince Jing, who had been standing among the clan members and had not spoken, walked up and said respectfully, "Father. I am here." Another middle-aged minister also respectfully stepped forward to wait for instructions. "The eldest princess's daughter, Nan 11, is the one appointed by heaven. From now on, she will be restored to the Xianyuan surname of the dongling royal family, named Zikan, and included in the genealogy of the direct lineage. She will be officially canonized as Princess Feng, live in the East Palace, and enjoy the ceremony of the Crown Prince. You two are fully responsible for handling this matter, and there must be no mistakes. Prince Jing and the minister of the imperial clan Yu Hongru knelt down together and respectfully accepted the order. Your son obeys the order. The emperor glanced at the people in front of him, and finally looked at Xianyuan 11. Princess Feng has just returned to Dongling, and she doesn't know much about Dongling, nor is she familiar with the royal family. Next, the eldest princess will be here. I'll give you more advice on this matter. After all, she's your daughter, and it's convenient for you and your daughter to talk. Xianyuan 11 nodded. Don't worry, father, I know what to do. The enthronement ceremony will be held in the Hall of Supreme Harmony in 3 days. Notify all royal relatives to come to the palace to meet the Crown Prince of Dongling at the family dinner tonight. His Majesty the Emperor looked around his 2 sons and ministers in the outer hall, and said in a light tone, no one is allowed to deliberately embarrass Princess Feng again, otherwise I don't mind killing the chicken to scare the monkey. The King of Wei's face changed slightly, and he lowered his head and remained silent. The other cabinet elders and royal relatives looked at each other calmly, and deep thoughts emerged in their eyes. The emperor's attitude towards Princess Feng was really beyond their expectations, and Princess Feng's performance in front of everyone was also beyond their expectations. The Princess Feng of Dongling predicted by the High Priest does not look like a pushover. High Priest the Emperor turned his head and looked at the man in white who came out with a scepter in his hand. You will preside over the ceremony of enthroning the Crown Prince, and you will also be fully responsible for the blessing ceremony in the sacrificial hall. The High Priest nodded. Your Majesty, rest assured, I will do my duty. According to etiquette, Princess Feng should meet the Queen, Imperial Concubine, and other elders in the harem after returning to the palace. However, the journey from Dezhou to Dongling is long, so you should settle down and have a good rest today to get enough energy. There is also a family dinner to deal with in the evening. The Emperor looked at Nan 11, do you think this arrangement is appropriate? Nan 11 nodded gently, grandfather's arrangement is appropriate. The Emperor then said, that's it, you and your mother go to rest first, let your husband stay, I have something to say to him alone. Nan 11 frowned, wrong, you and I have traveled a long distance, grandfather can wait until tomorrow to talk about anything. The Emperor was speechless for a while after hearing this. You have been traveling all the way and resting all the way, with the physical strength of the regent, you should not be tired. Author's words. First, I will present 1 chapter, and I will resume updating tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 276. I'm not too tired indeed, wrong, you said indifferently, but I'm busy for the time being. We'll talk tomorrow if there's anything. After that, he turned to look at Nan 11, are you tired? I'll accompany you to rest first, and ask someone to send a doctor to take your pulse. Wait, His Majesty the Emperor frowned, Princess Feng is unwell. Others also looked at her. Oh, it's nothing serious. Nan 11 raised her eyes to look at him, slowly gathered her cloak, and said in a very calm tone, it's just that I'm pregnant, Rong Yu is worried that I'll have a miscarriage after a long journey, so I can't help but worry. As soon as the voice fell, the hall fell into a dead silence. Pregnant. The Emperor's expression was slightly stiff, and his eyes subconsciously looked at Nan 11's abdomen, but then he realized that something was wrong and quickly retracted his gaze, but even if he just glanced at it very quickly, he could find Nan 11's slightly bulging abdomen. Just now, they were so busy talking that they didn't notice that everyone's expressions were dull, and they didn't know what they were feeling for a moment. As we all know, after the Crown Prince of Dongling ascended the throne, there has always been a custom of marrying with major families. Dongling has also had two empresses in history, and the imperial husbands in the harem were from the sons of major aristocratic families headed by Dongling. This is to consolidate the imperial power and also to consolidate the status of the aristocratic families. Dongling has always been a system where imperial power and aristocratic families coexist. However, this princess got married before she ascended the throne. Originally, this matter was a special situation, and they couldn't say anything, but they didn't expect Princess Feng to be pregnant so soon. The first thought that came to everyone's mind was that Princess Feng and the regent of Dazhu were a legitimate husband and wife relationship, and the child in her belly would have the most noble bloodline identity in Dongling as soon as he was born, the eldest son of the royal family. If it was a boy, would he be directly appointed as the next crown prince? But Rong Yu is the regent of the Great Zhou. If the child he gave birth to with Princess Feng becomes the crown prince of Dongling, Dongling may not be stable. Everyone frowned slightly, and many thoughts emerged in their minds in an instant. After a short silence, His Majesty the Emperor quickly said lightly, "Go and rest first, and we will talk about other things tomorrow." Nan 11 nodded, turned around and walked out with Rong Yu. Xianyuan 11 was followed by many palace servants, all of whom were ordered to serve in the East Palace. After walking out of the Dajhan Palace, Rong Yu took Nan 11's hand and whispered, "Are you nervous? You want to hear the truth?" Nan 11 raised the corner of her lips slightly, and smiled and tilted her head to look at him. Rong Yu hummed, "Of course it's the truth. Don't be nervous." Although Dongling and Dazhu are two countries, except that Dongling has an extra priest's palace, the two countries are essentially the same. Nan 11 smiled faintly. The royal family has different personalities, the ministers of the aristocratic families have their own intentions, people's hearts are good and evil, and intrigues can be seen everywhere. It's not a rare thing. Rong Yu didn't say anything. If I were just a country girl who had never seen the world and had never met the dignitaries of the imperial capital, then I might have felt some restraint, fear, and uneasiness when I first entered the palace. But the palace is familiar to me, and the emperor's identity has no deterrent power to me, so why should I be nervous? As she spoke, Nan 11 smiled leisurely. Besides, I have a powerful husband who is with me to protect me, so I am naturally fearless. Rong Yu raised his mouth. "I'm afraid that your husband will have to rely on the princess's protection in the future." Nan 11 raised his eyebrows. "No problem, I will protect you." The eldest princess who was walking in front twitched her mouth, and she couldn't help but said lightly, "Can you two restrain yourself a little? It's really embarrassing to be so disgusting in public." Nan 11 said, "I have been very restrained. I didn't hug or kiss." Xianyuan 11 paused, took a deep breath, and cleverly changed the subject. 11 you can continue to use your previous name as a nickname. You can't use names in the family tree randomly. As the crown prince, your royal grandfather gave you a name that implies nobility and avoids homophony with your mother. You have to keep it in mind." Nan 11 glanced at her mother and thought that it was okay to restore the surname Xianyuan. It was completely understandable that her name needed to avoid homophony with her mother, but why must she use the so-called noble Zi Chen as her royal name? These two words don't suit her at all. Zi Chen is the emperor's star. His Majesty is using this method to announce that you are the only heir to the throne. Rong Yu said in a gentle voice, "This is a recognition of you and a warning to others. If you don't like this name, don't worry. The name is only recorded in the family tree and has no effect on you. Because except the emperor, Xianyuan 11 and Rong Yu, no one dared to call the future empress by her maiden name." Nan 11 thought for a moment and nodded slowly, "Yes." There were two jade sedan chairs parked at the bottom of the steps. Xianyuan 11 sat on the one belonging to the eldest princess, and Rong Yu gently helped Nan 11 sit on the sedan chair belonging to the crown prince. They were escorted by the imperial guards. The palace servants surrounded the new crown prince of Dongling in a mighty manner. The group quickly left the Dajhan palace and walked towards the East Palace. At this time, in the emperor's bedroom, the emperor was in a bad mood and sat on the couch drinking tea. The king of Wei looked unpredictable. After a long silence, he said, "Father, will you let the regent of the Great Zhou be arrogant and bossy in the territory of Dongling?" The emperor lowered his head and lightly scraped the teacup, saying in a light tone, "What else? Do you think I should immediately issue an order to order Zi Chen to divorce the regent of the Great Zhou and his wife and sever their relationship?" The king of Wei was speechless. "That's not what I meant. I can give you several reasons." The emperor raised his eyes. "First, the regent of the Great Zhou has elite soldiers and cavalry. Although he has never fought with Dongling, his reputation on the battlefield is earned by real swords and guns, not by the kingdom of Shu and the northern frontier. If I ask him to divorce Zi Chen, can you guarantee that he will not send troops to Dongling in anger?" The king of Wei's face changed slightly and he was speechless. "Second, Zi Chen married him first and returned to Dongling later. I can order her to choose a husband, but I have no right to order her to abandon her existing husband. If I really do this, can you guarantee that Zi Chen will not abandon the country in anger and go back to the Great Zhou and never set foot in Dongling again?" As soon as the sentence came out, not only was the king of Wei completely speechless, but the other ministers also changed their faces instantly. The emperor's words actually hit the nail on the head. Like the king of Wei, they believed that the regent of the Great Zhou had no right to act arrogantly in the territory of Dongling, and had no right to interfere in the affairs of the crown prince of Dongling. But the emperor obviously saw things more deeply than they did. They had seen Princess Feng's attitude towards Rong Yu just now. If they really let the couple divorce, the consequences would be either a war between the Great Zhou and Dongling, or Princess Feng would return to the Great Zhou and no longer care about the affairs of Dongling. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 277. Third, the 9 countries in the world have been in peace and harmony for hundreds of years. Although there are occasional wars, it is generally peaceful. His Majesty the Emperor looked obviously tired and haggard, but today he is in the best spirits in half a year. At that time, since this year, the surrounding countries have been ready to make moves and have become restless. With the identity and ability of the regent of the Great Zhou dynasty, the relationship between their husband and wife can be regarded as a marriage between Dongling and the Great Zhou dynasty. It is also a blessing to the surrounding countries. Shock. As soon as these words came out, the princes and cabinet ministers realized the emperor's foresight and had different expressions for a moment. It is a fact that the Great Zhou dynasty is powerful, and the regent of the Great Zhou dynasty, Rong Yu, holds the power of most of the armies and horses of the Great Zhou dynasty. One person is enough to shake the entire Great Zhou dynasty. The marriage between the two countries and the alliance in terms of strength can indeed make other ambitious countries dare not act rashly. However, the more this happens, the more worried everyone feels. If it was just because the couple had a good relationship, or the regent of the Great Zhou dynasty relied on his military power to show off his power in the territory of Dongling, they would still have a legitimate reason to fight against him, and they could use all means to protect their family's interests, even using the harem in the name of not being involved in politics. He weakened his sense of existence, and used other methods to drive a wedge between him and Princess Feng, in order to maintain the orthodoxy of the Dongling bloodline. However, once they are involved in a marriage relationship, they must be polite to the ally of Great Zhou, and they must also treat the regent of Great Zhou with courtesy. If they continue to worry about the powerful background behind him, the entire Dongling, wouldn't it be true that all powerful officials and families would act based on his expression? The clan officials were silent, but they saw His Majesty the Emperor waving his hands a little tiredly. The high priest will stay for now, and everyone else should kneel down. Even though everyone still had many emotions in their hearts, they could only bow and leave at this time. The Emperor's energy has improved significantly in the past 2 days. The high priest in a snow-white robe said calmly, "I am not wrong." The Emperor leaned on the soft couch and said calmly, you said that Princess Feng's return to Dongling will bring auspiciousness. This is indeed somewhat credible. Ever since the imperial spies reported that Princess Fengluan had entered the border of Dongling, the emperor's health had been improving day by day. This was an effect that all the imperial doctors could not achieve despite their meticulous care day and night for more than half a year. It cannot be denied. There was no emotion on the high priest's gentle and elegant face, and he simply said, "What does the emperor really think about the regent of the great Zhou dynasty?" "What do you think?" the emperor asked instead without answering. "Will his existence subvert the Dongling Chao Gang?" "No," the high priest said calmly and firmly, "he will only leave Princess Feng's harem empty. He will be domineering and strong emotionally and have no desire for political power." "No desire," the emperor smiled lightly. "If there is really no desire, why does he still hold the power of 400,000 soldiers and horses? If he gives up military power, how can he protect his feelings?" The emperor frowned upon hearing this and thought thoughtfully. "You mean to say that he holds the power of 400,000 troops and horses, and despite the fear of the emperor of Zhou dynasty and the hostility of the Dongling Manchu dynasty, just to protect the relationship between husband and wife? No matter how I hear the sentence, I find it unbelievable." "Although the emperor finds it unbelievable, it is indeed the case," the high priest said. "The emperor cannot even imagine how far he can go to protect the relationship between him and Princess Feng from being destroyed, including deposing the emperor and killing people. Not to mention, if necessary, he can even destroy this country with his own hands." When the emperor heard this, his expression changed slightly. "So Princess Feng can only have him as her husband?" The high priest was silent for a moment. "Although I do not agree with this result, the final result must be like this." "No," the emperor shook his head. "Zi Chen is a woman after all, and is prone to being emotional. If the emperor's husband is only Rong Yu, I can't guarantee whether this country will be named Xianyuan or Rong in the future. I can never watch Dongling fall into the control of others." The high priest said calmly, "This is what I have said. The emperor's decision will not interfere." The emperor rubbed his brows tiredly. "How has Yandere been doing these 2 days?" Like the emperor, things started to improve after Princess Feng entered Dongling. The emperor frowned slightly. "What do you think if Princess Feng is kept in Dongling and Yandere continues to ascend the throne?" The high priest smiled calmly. "I have told the emperor the answer before." The emperor was silent. Princess Feng came to Dongling to be blessed by the gods, which can bring auspiciousness. However, the prerequisite for this auspiciousness is to obey the gods' decrees. If she disobeys the gods' decrees, it will only bring disaster to Dongling. The emperor refused to give up and always wanted to break the curse of having a female emperor in 200 years, but God's will was unpredictable. Even though he was the emperor, he did not have the power to violate the will of God. Heaven's heart is unpredictable. The emperor does not need to interfere too much. He only needs to obey the divine decree. The high priest raised his head and looked out the window. Although Princess Feng is the empress chosen by divine will, the road to becoming an emperor still needs to endure a lot of thorns. The emperor should know the thoughts of the heads of the major families. When the emperor's daughter returns, the dignitaries of the imperial capital and the civil and military officials of the entire dynasty are watching. The eager heart will not settle down. The monarch's power and the power of the ministers are constraining each other. This is the empress. We need to face the situation in the future. It just remains to be seen who will prevail in the final game and who will be the winner." His Majesty the Emperor closed his eyes and thought for a long time. "Forget it, I am already old and can no longer think about the future, so I will listen to you. The East Palace is neatly and elegantly decorated, and the furnishings are all prepared according to the standards of the Crown Prince, but because Nan 11 is a woman, the style has been slightly changed. The heavy purple gauze curtains look elegant and graceful, and the hollow mahogany partition screen separates the inner and outer halls. Under the 3-story wooden steps, there is a long sandalwood carved table for reading and writing during leisure time. On both ends of the long table are magnolias carefully cultivated by the palace people. At first glance, they are beautiful and elegant, adding a bit of elegance to this bedroom that represents a noble status. An exquisite brocade couch is set by the window, and the carved window is engraved with complex and noble patterns. The calligraphy and paintings hanging on the wall are obviously from the hands of masters, and the style is elegant and refined. The incense in the hall is curling, and the breath is clear and leisurely. We'll live here for the time being. Xianyuan11 led Nan 11 into the palace and smiled faintly. We'll have to move after we ascend the throne, so we'll only live here for 2 months. Nan 11 was a little surprised. Didn't the previous crown prince live here? No, Xianyuan11 smiled faintly. He couldn't handle the nobility here. Since he was named crown prince, his health has not been very good. He has been living in the Wei Wang mansion, so it's convenient for his father, the king, and his mother to take care of him. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 278. Can't hold back the nobility here? Nan 11 was speechless for a moment, but she just thought that her mother was also a person who believed in destiny. However, people from the Dongling royal family accepted the existence of the oracle of the royal family and the priesthood from the moment they were born. It is normal to have this belief. These are the palace servants who will stay in the East Palace in the future. Xianyuan11 turned around and looked at the 4 rows of maids standing respectfully in front of the palace steps, as well as 4 older female officials, and 2 nuns who were over 50 years old. With a light tone, Ziling, Yuetong, from now on you are the people of the East Palace. From now on, you will only obey the orders of Princess Feng. The glory of the East Palace will be your glory. If someone does anything treacherous, you will follow the rules of this palace. I know, don't blame me for not warning you beforehand. Ziling and Yuetong are the names of the 2 female officials. They are both old people who have served in the palace for more than 5 years. After hearing this, they immediately knelt down and said respectfully, I don't dare. The 4 rows of palace maidens behind him knelt on the ground obediently, fearfully, and respectfully. 11 have a good rest today. Don't forget to attend the family dinner tonight. Xianyuan11 turned his head, reached out to hold Nan 11's hand, and lightly reminded, planning your own affairs in your position, being a prince is different from being a princess. The East Palace must follow the rules of the East Palace. If there are some things that are inconvenient for you, you can leave them to Rong Yu. He is better at controlling them than you. Nan 11 murmured in a low voice, doesn't this mean that I don't have the majesty of Rong Yu? Xianyuan 11 smiled lightly, do you think you are majestic? She has Rong Yu said calmly, no one is more suitable to be the queen than 11 Xianyuan 11 was speechless. Forget it, she shouldn't talk too much. After a few brief explanations, Xianyuan 11 quickly left the East Palace with the servants of the eldest princess's palace. Nan 11 looked at the palace servants who were still kneeling in front of the steps and said in a calm tone, everyone, get up. Don't be too nervous, everyone just needs to. If you do something well, you will not be blamed easily. I am not someone who likes to express my anger and punish others, but as my mother said, if you break the rules of the palace, you will know the consequences. After saying this, she turned around and entered the palace. Rong Yu gently caressed her waist. After entering the palace, a burst of warmth hit her face. Rong Yu casually took off Nan 11's cloak and handed it to Yin Yu, who took it and hung it up. In addition to Yin Yu and Yin Shuang, Zhu Xiang and Begonia were also accompanied this time. It was obviously more reassuring to use one's own people when they first came to a strange place. Nan 11 walked to the carved brocade couch in front of the window and sat down. One of the female officials quickly came forward to pour tea. The aroma of hot tea filled the air, and Yuetong said respectfully, these are all new products just brought out from the imperial tea room today. Your Highness will try them first. Yunya calmly tested the poison and said calmly, from now on, I will do the job of serving tea and serving food. Later, you write the names of the palace guests and their respective duties on the roster for the princess to see. The princess decides. Yu Etong looked at Nan 11, who said, "Do as Yin Yu said." Yes, Yu Etong responded respectfully, "Your Highness, Princess, must be tired. I will make a bed for your Highness. Your Highness will take a rest first." Nan 11 hummed. Yu Etong and Zi Ling turned around and went into the inner hall to work. Nan 11 raised her eyes and looked at the palace people in the outer palace. There were as many as 40 people. Although the rules in the palace were strict and the palace people were divided into ranks and positions, it can be said that when she was in the regent's palace of the Great Zhou dynasty, there were not more than 10 people in the palace. People, and most of the maids were quiet. There were so many people suddenly there, and Nan 11 really had a headache for a while. After drinking tea, Nan 11 stood up and walked into the inner hall, rejecting everyone. "Let me be quiet for a while, and you all can go out. Yunyu, you are responsible for coordinating the grade responsibilities of everyone in the palace, and then tell them the rules that need to be followed in the future don't need to be too strict. We will all work together from now on." Yunyu responded with a smile, "Master, don't worry." After that, everyone was taken out. The two nuns, who had always been regarded as invisible people, frowned upon seeing this, and seemed to have something to say. However, when Princess Feng returned to the palace for the first time, they were still a little unable to control her temper, so they did not dare to speak rashly, so they had to join the others and wait for the moment. Withdrew. Nan 11 sat on the edge of the bed, her two slender arms wrapped around Rong Yu's waist affectionately and lovingly, and pressed her face against his chest. "Rong Yu." Rong Yu hugged her and stroked her back with his long and strong palms. "Are you tired?" "It's okay," Nan 11 said softly. "Do you feel uncomfortable? Not used to it?" Rong Yu shook his head. "No." Nan 11 raised her eyes and looked at him. "Aren't you going to lie to me?" Rong Yu chuckled, turned around and sat down on the edge of the bed, wrapping her whole body in his arms. "What are you lying to? Diangling is different from Das Hu. People here don't know you and won't regard you as one of their own. They may be hostile to you." Nan 11 sighed. "Your army, identity, and palace are all here. Das Hu, it's hard to avoid being in such a strange place." "No." Rong Yu lowered his head and kissed her face. "Don't worry, these scruples don't exist. Even if I don't have military power or the status of regent of the Great Zhou dynasty, I can still protect you." Nan 11 smiled, too. Juxiao Pavilion is a force that spreads all over the world. The identity of the regent of the Great Zhou dynasty is only valid in the Great Zhou dynasty, but the master of the Juxiao Pavilion is a person who is feared all over the world. "Go to sleep for a while," Rong Yu said softly and put her on the bed. "Have enough energy to deal with those monsters at night." "A monster?" Nan 11 laughed at his statement. "It shouldn't be that serious. Be prepared for the worst." Rong Yu lowered his head and kissed her lips. "Before the situation is clear, everyone is an enemy." Nan 11 hummed, and wanted to say something else, but suddenly a wave of sleepiness came over her without warning. She lifted her eyelids heavily, and finally closed her eyes and fell asleep. Rong Yu adjusted her to a comfortable position, tucked the quilt for her, looked at her gently for a moment, and turned to walk out. Yin Yu and Yin Shuang bowed their heads to salute him when they saw him coming out. Rong Yu said indifferently, "No one is allowed to go in and disturb the princess before I come back." The two knelt down to respond, and after saluting, they turned to enter the hall. Others dared not say a word, but stayed outside respectfully and peacefully. Rong Yu went to the East Palace garden alone, and saw from a distance the high priest in a snow-white robe standing on the garden attic with a scepter in his hand. The breeze blew down, and his clothes fluttered, with a fairy-like temperament. Rong Yu rose from the ground, rushed over like a gust of wind, and stood on the railing on the second floor in a blink of an eye. "Your Highness, I hope you are doing well." The high priest smiled gently. with a hint of bone-chilling coldness on the corners of his lips. I thought you wouldn't let her set foot in Dongling again, but it seems I was wrong. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 279. After Nan 11 entered the palace and settled down, Fukin and Chu Hongii left the palace. Go back and rest first. You are exhausted during this period in the public. Fukin was concerned about the reputation of his little ancestor and did not dare to kiss her, but his tone was completely gentle. I will be at home tonight. Have a good rest, and I will choose a suitable day to propose marriage to the Chu family in the next 2 days and finalize the marriage. Chu Hongii sat upright on the horse and looked at him expressionlessly when she heard this, saying nothing. What's wrong? Chu Hongii frowned slightly, as if hesitating for something. If your mother-in-law doesn't agree, don't get too serious with her. The corner of Fukin's lips raised slightly. What? Your wife-to-be is worried about upsetting her mother-in-law before she even walks in. Chu Hongii gave him a cold look. I listen to you. Fukin nodded, with a very obedient attitude. I will listen to whatever you say. Chu Hongii said yes, said nothing more, and went back to their homes. Fukin's original name was Xianyuan, and he was the only legitimate son of the Prince Jing's palace. He was granted the title of Crown Prince Ji. Although he often stayed in Dazhu in the past 2 years, he would come back to stay for 2 months every winter. The servants in the palace were no strangers to this master. Fukin got off his horse outside the gate of Prince Jing's mansion. As soon as he stepped into the gate of Prince Jing's mansion, the servants who came to greet him knelt on the ground. The second son of Prince Jing, Xuanyuanhua, was dressed in robes. He had handsome features and a slim body. He stood respectfully in front of the court and bowed slightly. Brother. Fukin glanced at him and said lightly, Where is mother? Xianyuanhua followed him. Mother is in Songhe Hall. Fukin's eyebrows moved slightly. Are there any guests? Yes. Xianyuanhua frowned slightly, unable to see clearly the expression in his eyes. Mother is talking to Mrs. Zhenguo. Mrs. Zhenguo? Fukin looked slightly calm and walked towards Songhe Hall. Besides Mrs. Zhenguo, who else is here? Miss Fang, the daughter of Duke Zhen, is also here. Walking into Songhe Hall, I heard a burst of relaxed chatter and laughter in the distance. Fukin paused slightly and seemed to have suddenly changed his mind. He turned to look at Xianyuanhua. I will go back to Hongchen Garden to wash up and take care of myself first. You send someone to tell mother that I have returned and go to greet her in half an hour. Xianyuanhua was surprised. We are already here, don't you go in directly. Men and women are not allowed to be intimate. If there are other girls around, I'd better avoid it. Fukin's tone was a little colder. He had obviously guessed what was being discussed in Songhe Hall at this time, but he had no intention of cooperating with him. Mother, you go and do your work too. After saying that, he turned around and walked in the other direction. Xianyuanhua watched his back, frowning slightly, turned to glance in the direction of Songhe Hall, raised his hand to call a maid, and said lightly, Go and report to the princess, and say that the prince has returned to the house. I will come to Songhewan in a few hours to say hello. The maid took the order and left. Xianyuanhua quickly turned around and left. Returning to Hongchen Garden, Fukin ordered someone to prepare hot water and take a bath to wash away the dust from his body. Then he changed into a moon-white brocade robe embroidered with bamboo patterns. Over the years alone, Fukin has learned to change his clothes and groom himself, but when he returns to the palace, he is no longer the young master Fukin he was before. The maids in Hongchen Garden are responsible for combing his hair, serving tea, and all the accessories that belong to the royal family. There is a dedicated person responsible for taking care of it. Your Majesty, The servant from Hongchen Yuan reported, "The princess wants you to go directly to Songhe Hall." Fukin frowned, "Is Mrs. Genkuo gone?" "Not yet." Fukin's face suddenly turned cold, and he was silent for a moment. Without saying a word, he walked out of Hongchen Garden and headed towards Songhe Hall. There was still laughter in the hall, which showed that the two sides were talking in harmony. Miss Fang has a dignified and beautiful appearance, a gentle temperament, and is a talented woman who is proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. If Chi can marry her, it will be really Princess Chi. The prince has arrived. The lively chatter and laughter in the hall suddenly stopped, and Princess Jing said displeasedly, "What are you reporting? Why don't you let the prince in quickly?" Fukin raised the corners of his lips slightly and walked into the hall. The young master has a noble appearance, rich and handsome appearance, as if he came with all the splendor of the sky. As soon as he stepped on the threshold, several people in the hall were stunned, especially the father, mother, and daughter of Genkuo. Miss Fang, who was sitting upright, had a blush on her pretty cheeks and lowered her head hastily, with a shy look on her face. Greetings to the mother and concubine. Fukin greeted the greetings gently and elegantly, and naturally looked at the Duke of Zhen's wife. "Is the Duke's wife here too?" Mrs. Zhenguo Gong nodded and looked at the noble and upright Crown Prince Jing, with an obvious look of satisfaction on her face. Just as he was about to open his mouth to praise a few words, he heard Fukin already speaking. "My son has just come back from the palace. The princess's cousin has officially made him the crown prince and moved into the East Palace." Fukin seemed not to notice Miss Fang sitting beside him. He gently and respectfully reported the affairs in the palace to his mother and said, "By the way, the matter of Princess Feng's return to the palace has finally been settled. My son has completed this task. The next step is to consider the marriage with Hong Yi. I plan to go to the Chu family in the next 2 days to discuss the details of the marriage and fix the date. By the way, mother wishes how about next?" The words fell slowly and slowly, but all the sounds in the hall seemed to have been lost in an instant, and it was surprisingly quiet. Princess Jing's face turned cold visibly. Miss Fang suddenly raised her eyes with a startled expression. She looked at Fukin and then couldn't help but look at Princess Jing and her mother, Mrs. Zhenkuagong. "Chu family?" Princess Jing's expression was indifferent. "I think you and the girl from the Chu family are not suitable, and I am planning to choose another suitable wife for you. Not suitable? Fu Chen had a gentle smile on his lips. "My son thinks it is very suitable." Princess Jing looked at him in disbelief. "You, what did you say?" "I have already made an engagement with Chu Hongii. How much harm will it cause to my daughter if I cancel the engagement without a reasonable reason? Even if you are a royal noble, you should not do such a treacherous thing," Fu Chen said indifferently. "Besides, I like Hongii. Yi's temperament, heroic, and a heroine, is the best match for me." Princess Jing obviously did not expect that her own son would not give her any face in front of outsiders, and she was so angry that her face turned blue. "Cheater. Marriage is a matter of parents' orders. How can you do whatever you want?" "What do you mean by this, mother?" Fu Chen frowned. "This marriage was originally decided by my father and Uncle Chu. My son has obeyed my parents' orders. Mother should know that marriage is a matter of life and death. How can you get married or break it as you say?" Princess Jing choked, her face turned blue and white. "Mother should have something to discuss with others, so I won't bother you." Fu Chen bowed slightly. "Son, take your leave." After saying that, he turned around and left Songhe Hall without looking back. From beginning to end, he didn't even look at what Miss Fang looked like, and naturally didn't care about the impact of these words on her. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 280. He had just sent someone to remind his mother of his return, and he had already given enough time for Mrs. Genkuo and her daughter to leave first. If they didn't leave, don't blame him for being merciless. Songhe Hall was quiet for a long time. Mrs. Zhenguo Gong looked worried and a little worried on her face, but she said nothing for a moment because she could not afford to offend Prince Jing's palace. After a long silence, she forced a smile and said, "Let's discuss this later. Chi'er just came back, and some things may not be clear yet. I will have a good talk with him later." Princess Jing smiled lightly, maintaining the dignified demeanor that Princess Jing should have. Chu Hongii was born in a general, and has a strong temper. Although she has military exploits, I don't think she is suitable to be a good wife, and Madam should also know this. Mrs. Zhenguo was slightly stunned when she heard this, and then her expression became obviously better, because she knew that Princess Jing was telling the truth. Chu Hongii has practiced martial arts since she was a child. Her martial arts skills are not to be underestimated. She is no problem leading troops in battles. No one in the civil and military circles in the court will underestimate her. Even the wife of the Duke of Zhenguo thinks that Hong Yi is a hero among women. I also admire her a little privately. But admiration is admiration, admiration is admiration, but a house with royal relatives and nobles is not suitable for such a woman to be the mistress of the house. What they need is a virtuous wife who is well educated, dignified, and elegant, who can go out into the hall and manage the inner house well, not a tough girl who only knows how to wield a sword and a gun on the battlefield. Especially for a royal mistress like Princess Jing, she naturally wants a daughter-in-law who is humble, gentle, virtuous, and virtuous. Although the Zhenguo Palace is not as powerful as the pure-blooded Prince Jing, it is still a prominent family. His daughter Lan Yukankai, he is proficient in calligraphy and painting, has a gentle and kind temperament, and has carefully taught the mistress how to control her subordinates. She is a perfect match for her. On the other hand, Chu Hongii has a cold temper and an indifferent temperament. If she really marries into Prince Jing's palace, can Prince Ji be able to conquer her? I'm afraid even Princess Jing doesn't have much dignity in front of this daughter-in-law. The more Mrs. Zhenguo thought about it, the more she felt that this was a God-given match that must not be missed. As for Prince Ji's attitude, she didn't think it was a problem. Since ancient times, marriage matters must follow the orders of the parents. According to the matchmaker, even if Prince Ji and Chu Hongii have a marriage contract, they just need to find a legitimate reason to back out. Judging from Princess Jing's current attitude, Chu Hongii is absolutely you can't enter Prince Jing's mansion. Thinking like this, she stood up and said goodbye. I stayed a little late today. I took Lan Yi back first. Last night, the queen and I specially asked for a favor to let Aunt Su from the palace enter the house for a few days. Teach Lan Yi etiquette. Although I have been strict with her since she was a child, I think that she is not as thorough as the nuns in the palace. Hearing this, Princess Jing raised a smile and glanced at Fang Lanyi, who had a respectful but calm posture with lowered eyebrows and lowered eyes. She couldn't help but praise, "Miss Fang is smart, elegant, and dignified. Fang, I am extremely satisfied." When Mrs. Zhenguo heard this, she was naturally happy from the bottom of her heart. A princess and a first-class lady, smiling, complimenting each other, tacitly satisfied, as if they had forgotten the unpleasantness just now, and their attitude was so enthusiastic that they seemed to have become a family. Princess Jing personally escorted Mrs. Zhenguo out. After walking for a while, Mrs. Zhenguo repeatedly refused and dissuaded her, and sent her to the corridor leading to the front hall. Then she ordered the nanny beside her to escort the mother and daughter out. "Mansion, stop and watch by yourself. Where is the prince?" Reporting to the princess, "The prince has returned to Hongchen Garden." Princess Jing did not stay for a moment, turned around and walked towards Hongchen Yuan, followed by her personal maid respectfully and quietly. Fukan is in the study at this time. When the servants came to report, he was actually a little surprised. His mother was arrogant and liked to give orders. Not to mention being extremely strict with the servants in the house, she always liked to put on airs even in front of her own son to show off her the identity and absolute authoritative position of the mistress of the first palace of Prince Jing. On weekdays, when she wants to see anyone, she usually summons her directly. Naturally, there is a nanny or maid beside her who is responsible for passing the message. Although it is not the first time that Yu has deigned to visit his Hongchen garden in person, it is still true in Fukin's memory of 20 years. Not common. This shows how important his marriage is to her. It is so important that her opinion must be the main one and it must be handled by her. Fukin's expression became lighter, thinking of what Chu Hongii once said, "Your mother-in-law doesn't want me to marry you." Now that I think about it, I realize that it's not just that I don't want to. His mother-in-law couldn't tolerate it at all. Fukin stood up and walked out, leaving the study and going directly to the main room. The servants were serving tea, and his mother was sitting at the round table, her expression obviously a little more unhappy than usual. As soon as Fukin stepped across the threshold, he heard his mother's cold voice that could not be refuted, "I don't agree with the marriage with Chu Hongii. You should go to Chu's house tomorrow to cancel the marriage." Fukin stopped in his tracks and looked up at his mother, with a gentle smile on his beautiful and elegant face. Just now in Songhe Hall, my son's words were made very clear. Mother should understand my attitude. "Chu Hongii is not suitable to be your wife," Princess Jing said in a cold tone. "You may not know it just after you came back, but I was just discussing your marriage with Miss Fang with Mrs. Zhenguo. Miss Fang is beautiful, smart, and has both political integrity and talent. She is a dignified, noble, courteous girl who knows all kinds of music, chess, calligraphy and painting. She is suitable to marry into Prince Jing's palace and be your wife. What mother values is her humble and polite character." Fu Chen smiled lightly. "It would be best if she could be respectful and attentive in front of mother, let mother call her and send her away at will, and it would be best if she could not fight back or scold her. Only in this way can she be the most suitable daughter-in-law for Jingwang Mansion." "Is that what mother means?" Princess Jing's face suddenly turned cold, as if covered with a layer of frost. "Is that how you talk to me? My son has been outside for a long time and is not used to the rules of Jingwang Mansion." Fu Chen said lightly, "If I have offended you, please forgive me. After all, you only have me as your son, and you can't break off relations with me." Princess Jing's face turned pale. "As long as I am here, Chu Hongii will never enter the gate of Prince Jing's mansion." Fu Chen fell silent, looking at his mother calmly. After a moment, the corners of his lips slightly raised, and his beautiful phoenix eyes raised a smile. "Except me and Hongii, no one can decide my marriage. If mother really doesn't want this daughter-in-law, I can marry into the Chu family."